The trial is underway for the Baltimore cop charged with the murder of Freddie Gray in police custody, as prosecutors seek their first conviction in the high-profile case. Caesar Goodson was the driver of the police wagon, where prosecutors say Gray, who was not seatbelted, suffered a severe spinal injury during transport after an illegal arrest. The 25-year-old's death sparked mass protests over policies that protect abusive police, and prosecutors say Goodson bears most of the blame. If convicted, the 46-year-old officer faces 30 years in prison for the charge of second-degree depraved-hearted murder alone, the most serious charge against the 6 officers. During opening arguments, the defense said police routinely do not seatbelt passengers during wagon transport, as the space is too narrow and the officer would have to, quote, be body-to-body with the passenger. But Michael Wood, a retired Baltimore police sergeant, strongly disagrees. He says Freddie Gray was handcuffed and would not pose a threat.
Look, I was a sergeant in the Baltimore Police Department. Every single one of my officers knew to put a seatbelt on. I wrote a guide on how to be a police in 2010. It says everyone is seatbelted. The Maryland law says you're seatbelted. You get GOs at the academy. Your supervisor has to make sure you get those GOs and sign for them. So the idea that he didn't know, or that anyone didn't know, is ridiculous. Everyone in this state knows that you have to be seatbelted, and when you're responsible for somebody, guess what? You gotta seatbelt them. And if they come out injured, that is completely on you. There's just no way around it.
After a drawn-out defense motion to dismiss the charges, in which a visibly annoyed Judge Barry Williams angrily admonished the state, he ultimately rejected the motion for dismissal. But he did find the prosecution withheld evidence that would have helped the defendant.
I was taken aback by how the judge responded to the prosecution. From the very beginning, the judge's temperament showed a lack of patience and annoyance, if not actual anger, towards the prosecution. And that surprised me. You don't often see a judge ever call the prosecution to task for a discovery violation. Of course, police defendants on trial are a very different experience than the ordinary poor or low-income defendant of color who's on trial.
Opening arguments followed where some observers noted the state did not present overwhelming evidence for its case. The prosecution alleged Goodson gave Gray a, quote, rough ride, intended to hurt the prisoner during transport. This is University of Maryland law professor Doug Kolbert, who is not directly involved in the case.
Well, what's critical is the nature of the charges against the officer and the fact that there appeared to be evidence that would indicate that the defendant took Freddie Gray on a rough ride. I expected to hear more from the prosecution about the evidence that would allow a fact finder to conclude that there was indeed a rough ride, but I didn't hear as much as I thought I would.
Goodson's defense will also argue he did not make the arrest of Freddie Gray and therefore is not responsible for seatbelting him. In the 2 previous trials, other officers testify it is the duty of the wagon driver, Goodson, to seatbelt the passenger.
Passing of responsibility and blame cast on other officers who are co-defendants, and that's been a defense strategy, as I expect it would be. But what we're left with here is the officer's responsibility for doing things, and we got 2 very different versions of Freddie Gray from the prosecution and defense. The defense went as far as to suggest that Freddie Gray may have injured himself.
Questions remain to whether Dante Allen, a witness inside the police wagon with Freddie Gray, will testify during the trial and what his testimony will be. He initially told police that Gray was banging on the walls of the wagon after prosecutors say Gray was already severely injured. But he later gave reporters a contradictory statement.
And they trying to make it seem like I told them that, you know what I mean, that Freddie Gray did that to himself. Why the would he do that to himself?
What's interesting is that Dante Allen credibility would be something that would always be questioned based upon prior convictions and other items. And so for the defense to be relying on Dante Allen suggests that the judge may not find him a credible witness.
Kolbert emphasized it is very rare for judges to rule against police officers.
It's always difficult to present sufficient evidence when a police defendant is on trial to meet the state's burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It will always take, in my opinion, very strong evidence to convict or to convince a fact finder of a police officer's guilt.
Many in Baltimore say they are not optimistic the Freddie Gray case will result in convictions of police. Adam Jackson is CEO of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, a group that helped organize protests after Freddie Gray's death in police custody last year.
The protesting has kind of died down because it's all going through the motions of the legal system. But what we've seen, at least in the first two cases that have been tried, is that there hasn't been any process to hold them accountable outside of going through the legal process, and ultimately they haven't been sent to jail and they haven't been convicted. And so to me, that is the issue of the day, figuring out how to change the institutional arrangements that got us to here in the first place. And not in like the abstract kind of way, like we need to solve for racism in order to get here, in order to fix the problem. Like the racism that exists in terms of how police are held accountable for their misconduct, the laws and legislation that are in place. Like those things are the things that need to be changed. And I think that people are losing faith in this process because they actually see that the judicial system is orchestrated and arranged in such a way where police officers won't be sent to jail for killing black people. And that's the case with Trayvon Martin, the case with Mike Brown, and other black people who have been killed by police.
Stay tuned for the real news for more developments to the case. With Shah Jahan Noor, this is Jessel Noor in Baltimore.